Today, Asus officially announces their PG27AQDM. It's their answer to the LG 27-inch 240Hz 1440p OLED that we just looked at. They're using the same panel, but their new heatsink and voltage control tweaks supposedly allow for higher brightness, which was really my only complaint with the otherwise very impressive 27GR95QEB. And I do have the newest firmware update here on the Asus versus some of the earlier reviews you might have seen. But LG has also released new firmware that fixes the 4K 120 bug and offers improved performance in SDR and HDR mode. So we've got them both in-house today. I'm going to remeasure everything and see if it changes any of my picks from the last video, which you should definitely watch if you haven't already. The physical design of this monitor leans heavily into the futuristic cyberpunk aesthetic. It's going to be a polarizing choice for a monitor priced at $999 US. We've got the logo on the back. We've got a large bright red logo on the front. We've got lit Swift typeface on the rear of the stand. There's lighting at the base of the stand. We've got a projected logo coming from under the stand. You can disable all the stand lighting, but it's all red on the base. There's no option to change colors. You do have more control over the eye logo on the rear. The legs on this thing give it like a raised stance off the desk. It's kind of got like a cyber arachnid thing going on. It is fully articulating. It comes in just about exactly an inch shorter than the LG, which to be fair is one of the tallest stands I've come across. You can VESA mount this, of course, with the included adapter. Controls are a joystick located right behind the front logo, and there's a power and an input select button right beside it. For connections, we get DisplayPort 1.4 and two HDMI 2.0 ports. This is pretty disappointing to see. I was looking for 2.1 on the HDMI like we saw on the LG, so we could utilize 240Hz on every input. I'm seeing a lot of nerd rage out there about the decision to use anything other than glossy coating on an OLED monitor, but there's no glossy coating here either. It's some sort of hybrid that they're calling micro texture to diffuse reflections. To my eye, it appears very similar to the matte coating used on the LG, so no real difference here. We also have the same WOLED subpixel layout here, which gives us RWBG instead of RGB. This seems to just be the standard on OLED display products, and it doesn't play nice with ClearType in Windows. It results in some fringing around the text. Whether this bothers you is really subjective. It's not a big deal to me, but if this was the deal breaker for you on the LG or other OLED products, it's no different here. Getting right into measurements, the white point as shipped is nearly spot on 6500K. That's good to see. Sustained max brightness in SDR mode comes in at a very respectable 252 nits. That's over a 30% increase over the 188 nits we saw on the white point corrected measurement on the LG with the factory firmware. The new firmware for the LG resulted in no increase to brightness in SDR in the Gamer 1 profile that I originally tested. I ran it a ton of times and it's all within 0 to 2 nits margin of error. Moving to the Gamer 2 profile with the white point corrected back to 6500 with the C1 custom setting, we get 205 nits, so still considerably shy of the Asus. If you are planning to do that firmware upgrade, be aware that it took approximately 2.5 hours to complete on my unit, where the Asus took roughly 6 minutes. There is a mode here in the menu called Uniform Brightness, and when you first toggle it, it looks like the whole screen gets brighter, but all it's actually doing is increasing the brightness in peak areas when the rest of the screen is totally dark. So if I measure this small white box on an all black background, I get 457 nits, which is crazy. If you measure with the whole screen white, it goes down to 221 max. So for max overall brightness in SDR mode, don't let your eyes play tricks on you, just keep this ticked on. It goes away in HDR mode anyway. This monitor comes out of the box at 100% brightness with the proper white point of 6500K and no power saving modes that you have to go in and disable. The only thing I'd really do in terms of settings is turn on the DCI-P3 under the color space to add some vibrancy to your games. If you find it a little too saturated, just stay with the standard sRGB. For gray to gray response times, we're still seeing that insane average of 0.1 measured with the LDAT, max of only 0.2. Even though like the LG, they're claiming a 0.03 millisecond response, it's wild unnecessary in my opinion, as 0.1 or 0.2 milliseconds is still insanely faster than even 1.5, which is already crazy low. The only thing interesting here is that we see a pretty solid reduction in overshoot percentage. This beat LG's original numbers by a pretty healthy margin, but the new firmware sees it pretty much neck and neck with the Asus, with 0.5% average, 5.4% max up, and 9.2% max down. There seems to be visually no difference in motion blur with the moving UFO captures, which is expected given the data. The color coverage is solid here. The DCI-P3 mode offers wide gamut and actually edges out the LG, but only barely. It's probably nothing you'll notice in use. There is an sRGB clamp here too if you need it. In SDR gaming, this is it. This is the brightness I was missing on the LG. I would probably still run it at or very close to 100% even in a dark room, but this is all the OLED goodness I was expecting when I first got wind of the LG. Of course, you still get that amazing infinite contrast, the depth to the image, the crystal clear motion, and the crazy fast response times. Where a 360Hz panel could potentially edge this in terms of performance is in smoothness, but the trick there is that whatever you play has to actually be able to run at 360Hz. Most AAA single-player games aren't hitting even close to 240 at 1440p, so you have to heavily weigh how you use your monitor. Modern Warfare 2, my main competitive title, doesn't run above 240 for me on a 4080 even at low detail, so I'm not missing anything. If you're playing something a lot lighter like CS or Val or maybe Overwatch 2, stuff that can consistently hit 360Hz, you'll just have to weigh that in. For HDR performance, embarrassingly, I have to eat a little shit here because I've only recently migrated my gaming system over to Windows 11, and I didn't realize they now have an HDR calibration app separate from the ones you normally find in-game. It makes a massive difference to HDR on the PC side. Run it before whatever your game's own internal calibration is. Now games that have okay HDR support look amazing, and games that already had great HDR look next level. Unsurprisingly, HDR media consumption looks top tier. Yes, even with the matte coating, because this is where OLED really shines. Dune played off the Xbox, which is practically a tour de force of dark meets light, looks incredible. Any early reports you may have heard that this monitor was struggling with HDR seems to have been resolved with the latest firmware. For variable refresh rate, we have native FreeSync with G-Sync compatibility as opposed to a dedicated G-Sync module. The same holds true on the LG, despite being marked with a G-Sync sticker on the stand. After the review of the LG, a few people reached out to me and asked about flickering with variable refresh rate, and I actually had to go research this because I didn't experience this with any gaming at all on the LG, and I'm really sensitive to stuff like that. I also sit in front of a 48-inch LG CX every day for work, and I don't notice it there either. Display Ninja has a pretty solid write-up on it with some potential fixes. I'll link that down in the description. It's evidently a known issue on the CX, C1, and C2 TVs as well. The only time I was able to see this was on the PS5 when it was testing different video modes for 1440p. When it got to the 48, 60, 120 FPS testing, I noticed a flicker in the dark areas when it was jumping between frame rates. The LG does this in this test as well. A lot of games on the console side are frame capped at 30 or 60, but I didn't see this even in something like Spider-Man Miles Morales, where the game is constantly moving anywhere between like 60 and 120 FPS. I couldn't demonstrate this on the PC side. It didn't matter whether I had G-Sync enabled for full screen only or windowed mode as well. My take on this is that yes, it's obviously an issue for some people. There are write-ups out there about it if you go digging for it, but it seems to only affect certain setups or games or applications. The only way to be 100% is to try it for yourself or simply avoid OLED at this point. On the console side, the PS5 sees all resolutions, FPS, and variable refresh rates unlocked. You're also able to output a native 1440p. It looks really solid, particularly on games that have strong HDR like Miles Morales, God of War Ragnarok, or Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. They look insane. On The Last of Us 2, it looked better and brighter to me to disable HDR in the settings. Over on the Xbox side, we have compatibility for everything except the combo of 4K and 120 FPS. We seem to be limited to 4K 60 and it downscales. This allows us to use HDR on the Xbox that we didn't see on the PG27AQDM. The HDR looks great here as well. Both the LG and this panel do a great job with console support, with the LG offering that 4K 120 FPS support on the Xbox. If you already own the LG and you've been enjoying it, I don't see any reason at all that this video should make you second guess your purchase. But if you're set on a 240Hz OLED and you haven't bought yet, this is my recommendation. If Asus just would have included HDMI 2.1, something objectively better than 2.0, we could have pointed to the other specs where the panels are basically tied and the increased brightness, and ignoring some very subjective aesthetic choices, it would have been an easy win. Personally, I like the look of the LG on the desk a bit more. But minus the HDMI 2.1, this is just a better implementation of this panel and it results in better performance. We just don't know at what cost. Does the additional brightness cause burn-in faster? Does the heatsink design offset the idea that it's going to burn in? We just don't know. Versus something like the PG27AQDM, it puts me in a really difficult spot here as a reviewer, because when you add it all up here, the stellar SDR performance, the solid HDR performance on PC, the HDR performance on both consoles, visually OLED is just a superior image to consumer IPS, regardless of use case, content creation, media consumption, all the gaming, it's all there. Advantages to the AQN are you get 360Hz, a dedicated G-Sync module, not just compatibility. There's no potential risk of VRR flicker. You don't get the weird text fringing in Windows, and the longevity of the display shouldn't be any concern. You do take a step back in overall image quality, HDR performance, and console compatibility, where you get HDR support on the PS5 side, but not on the Xbox side. The major issue is how long are these OLED panels going to last before we start dealing with burn-in. If you've got deep pockets and you can afford to replace a $1,000 OLED panel as needed, this is, for me, as good as it gets right now. But if you can't afford to do that, or you're just more responsible with money, and or you do play titles that can consistently hit 360 Hz, and HDR is not a big deal for you, the PG27AQN is probably the safer recommendation. What is obvious is that self-lit pixel tech is the way forward. Once you go OLED, it's difficult to seriously consider other monitor technologies. It just feels really early still, and until we get to the promised land of micro LED monitors, some of the uncertainty we have here is just part of the early adopter tax. I will be running this as my primary display for the foreseeable future. One, because it looks insane, and two, because I want to see how it performs long term. If you got some value out of this video today, do me a solid and hit the like button and that subscribe button. And if you want to talk shop about anything on your desk, the best place to do that is in my private Discord. I will link that down in the description. Next up is the Audeze Maxwell. That's it for today, and I will catch you all in the next one. Stay up.